They have crew to work on a production. So we work with all levels, from people sort of like the production on things like Bargain Hunt, Pobl y Cwm, Casualty, up to sort of larger companies who are coming to film, like sort of, you know, the Netflix, Disney, HBOs, when they're coming and working in Wales. We're primarily, we're set up by a company called Bad Wolf, hence the t-shirt. I'm in sort of a bit more kind of casual thing because I've been up at Bryn Alyn this morning, just up the road. Yeah, and sort of like we work, they're a production company responsible for things like His Dark Materials, Industry, I Hate Susie, Discovery of Witches, and they've recently wrapped on a new series for ITV called The Winter King, based on the Bernard Cornwell books. And the main thing, I think, is that they're currently filming the new Doctor Who episodes. My job, what I tend to sort of is doing, it's about being, we are a link between the creative industries and the sort of like the future workforce. And it's about sort of, the reason I was in a school this morning is that part of that is about sort of giving people guidance in terms of school workshops, making people more aware of the opportunities in the industry. Then going up in terms of the careers guidance, we offer work shadowing on placements on stuff. We also have a website with loads of sort of, we give people application support, trainee placements, and then lead up to a vacancy page and a professional crew database. What I'm going to be doing today is quickly giving you a bit of a kind of insight towards the industry. I know you've got quite a few different backgrounds, so the presentation is going to be quite sort of varied, but hopefully it's about sort of giving people an idea about the range of different pathways into the industry. No matter what you've actually got in mind, or even if you haven't even considered working in the industry before, it's about sort of actually there are niches that are underrepresented, with actually shortages. One part of the industry massively oversubscribed, and then other parts that are kind of like niches you get into. So we work with, you know, sort of like productions. You're talking about sort of like generally across the production, like His Dark Materials, you're talking about sort of about 500 people are needed on a production. But even so, sort of when it comes to sort of actually getting that first opportunity, it's that, obviously what people tend to sort of be very aware of is that for the doorways into the industry, there's more people wanting to work in the industry than there are opportunities. That's the kind of like the bad news I like to start off with. The reality is that actually the industry, what it actually is a question of, you have got a certain amount of jobs, but we tend to find that we get lots of people applying for certain jobs, and then other ones which are fewer people applying for, and even some whereby we're literally trying to find anybody to do things. There are certain positions whereby I'm currently sort of like Pobl y Cwm are just desperate for anybody Welsh speaking to come and work on sort of their production at the moment. And it's interesting in terms of that is a pathway in, because they're kind of like struggling because they're at the bottom of the drama food chain in Cardiff. Because what we had is a couple of years ago in 2021, we had Disney coming in to film Willow in Bridgend, and given the salaries that they were offering, people who would previously have been signing up to work on His Dark Materials for Bad Wolf went to work for Disney, which then meant that people like Bad Wolf were then taking people who would have worked on things like Casualty, and then Casualty were then picking people from Pobl y Cwm, the kind of like more niche thing, up then, and so you just sort of getting that kind of like that sort of food chain feeding up, and people getting shortages. I've got a quick video to show you and hopefully give you a bit more of an idea of kind of the full range of things that happen behind the scenes, and that there's different niches within it. So hopefully this is, I'll just make sure this is, is the sound on there?
Yeah, it's a dialogue on the
There we go.
scale and the level of detail is so incredible. It's exactly what you want when you're fulfilling a fantasy world that so many people have imagined in their own minds.
I was looking out a window and there was like lentils or something. It had a label about how much these were. Now that was never ever going to be featured, but someone had taken the time to do all that. You think it doesn't matter, you think, well, nobody's going to see that, but actually, it does matter.
Building this entire town wasn't an ostentatious affair. There was actually a pragmatic thought process behind it.
Dan May and I were very closely working together as we do. He saw it as a kind of weak spot. We know it's going to be expensive. We know it's going to be a huge undertaking to do it authentically, do it well, when actually the costs of the bear and demons, things like that, are going to be extraordinary. And if you then put environmental work in every shot, you've got real problems. It was an amazing feat. It was literally a whole town with interiors, exteriors, a dock, roofs, and it was for one episode. We literally squeezed every bit of that town out for that episode, and I think it's very exciting. Dan May and I, we work together because I want him to try and work out the gap between the VFX and live action world with me. You know, it's what we do. Him and I work together doing this for years.
By the time Charleston came round in pre-production, we already had, I'd done quite a lot of concept art for Joel on what we thought it would be, and then from that we generated a bunch of buildings that you could orientate them around into various different layouts. We had to basically find this location that really didn't exist. We found this quarry, so part of the process was to scan and plan that environment out so that we could do some 3D storyboarding and some more complicated previs sequences involving the bear.
It's trying to mix up things that exist and create a look that you believe but is timeless. There's different technologies in Lara's world. They travel by Zeppelin, so there will be certain things, fabrics and technology that would exist in Lara's world. So then that will influence how people dress.
Costumes are really interesting. Something slightly military to him, even though he's been a theologian and he is a scientist. He's also an adventurer and an explorer, and I think we've reflected that really well.
I loved the first costume of all of them. Then I got my beautiful fur coat, which is a bit of a pain when you're doing a location and it's boiling hot in September, but it's great for when you're in the studio and it's freezing.
Caroline is an incredible designer, and it's been fun actually, because the Egyptians are so cool. You will see, when you see all of the extras and everything, we were like, we're so cool! So we have a great old time with our costumes.
I think my character was well cool. This jacket is sick. Look at my ring. It's a hawk.
We had to make a costume that would look of the earth, of the forest, like she had just wrapped rags around her, but also be sturdy enough for her to fly, for me to have a harness underneath my costume. I'm here to help. I'm in awe of them. It really helps me as an actor.
So hopefully you can see there that there's obviously all the stuff we're talking about, the set design, you know, the fact that all those buildings had to be constructed, all the kind of like, they're made to look old. The art department come in, they'll paint about 3 layers of paint on, then take away half of them to make it look aged. These are all the props and the level of detail that goes into the props. It's almost heartbreaking to sort of when, for series 3, they built this church chapel and they kind of like painted to make it look as if it was all the frescoes in the ceiling were hundreds of years old and it was peeling off. And then when I was watching the series, he's just desperate for the cameraman to tilt the camera up and thinking, there's all that work up there and it's never being seen. But it's all this sort of detail about sort of giving the actors that sort of the feeling of being sort of inside this sort of situation. You know, then you're talking about all the sort of like the puppetry that goes on, the sort of like the motion capture and performance capture that goes on nowadays. The fact of, you know, all the stunt performers reacting to the talking animals, which aren't even there for months till months afterwards. The fact that there's that crossover more and more in terms of crossover between TV and film productions, the video games. You've got video games, which are essentially sort of small films, you know, animated films, and the cut scenes between sequences. It's even the point now is also the fact they're using, when they're doing that kind of digital set building beforehand, they're using video game software, the Unreal Engine they use to design a lot of video games nowadays. You know, that's what they're using to build the sets beforehand so that the directors can walk around them, decide where the build's going to be, where the camera's going to be. They'll affect the kind of structural integrity of different parts of the set where they need to be able to support a camera. All through that into the, you know, things like sort of the costume work, and into the fact that kind of, you know, to work in the costume department, it's not just about being able to sort of, you know, design something, it's having the historical background, the research aspect, even then into the breakdown of the artists, so the people who have to take the costumes and make them look as if they've been these brand new costumes, making them look worn. You know, sticking them on the hanger, beating them with a stick for about 10 minutes to get them all creased and sort of thing, or scuffing them up, and all these sorts of aspects, you know, that are needed. So on a normal production, we are talking about, you know, a range of different departments. Was I skipping that? There you go. So we're talking about a range of different departments, you know, around about sort of roughly 30 different places, and they're not sort of islands where they operate entirely sort of independently. They do sort of have massive crossover, you know, but it's really worthwhile knowing about the structure of the industry, and I think it's worth because it can be influential in terms of people coming into the industry. I've had people who want to be directors, and then I ask, why do you want to be a director? And they say, I want to be in charge. At which point you're going, nope, that's the production office. They're the people making the decisions. You know, the fact that high-end TV programs such as, you know, the dramas you see, high-end TV is a classification for TV programs that cost more than £1 million per episode. So you need a pretty good finance department. We've got all the constructions, props, lights, camera, sound. You know, people forget about catering. The needs that we need sort of like when you've got 500 people working on something, you know, about that. The importance of health and safety. Publicity, the whole marketing department. You know, when you hear of a film costs sort of like $100 million, and then it does sort of 200 million at the box office, and they're kind of disappointed. And the reason is they never tell you about the fact that when if a film's cost 100 million, they then spend another 80 million on publicity and marketing. So the reason they're disappointed is they want to be making 250, 300 million to be able to make a decent profit. And the special effects, the visual effects. COVID, the restrictions now are, there's been a department that's obviously been managing that. At the studio down in Cardiff, they're taking, I think, last of the main sort of restrictions off next month. But this is going to be an area whereby I think a lot of that funding will be going into creating sustainability departments. When you see end of programs, you see Albert, will often be listed in the credits, back end of the credits. It's getting that certification is going to become increasingly important to productions going forward. It's been, the more you understand, you can be able to identify different departments. We've had instances whereby, runner is the one a lot of people sort of target as being the sort of go-to sort of job as your first job in the industry. Last year and this year, we've had instances whereby we've had a office runner job and an office assistant job up at the same time in different departments. On both occasions, the runner position got over 150 applications, and on both occasions, the office assistant roles got less than 30. And yet you look at the job description, they're identical. It's just that it is about the fact that different departments, they interchange on the use of those sort of the terms. It's also about the fact of identifying how different things are used. A producer could be somebody working in production or actually somebody making something. So last summer we had, when Bad Wolf for advertising positions to work on Doctor Who, they had a camera trainee position which had over 250 people apply. And the next week we had a content producer role with Bright Branch, and it had less than 20 people apply. Now, the camera trainee position would have been essentially making tea, fetching batteries, fetching cables, spending time learning about the camera department. The content producer was going to be working on behind the scenes footage for social media, actually going out, interviewing the main sort of talent and producing short content for social media. I would have said the second one would be the one to get you an opportunity to actually get your hands on doing stuff. Obviously, no, you're not working with this sort of same level of equipment as what you would have been doing in the camera department, but it's about identifying and seeing these sort of different pathways are useful. In terms of sort of then what we're talking about, sort of actually sort of the way to go and about sort of finding things, it really is about sort of behind the scenes content. There's so much information out there in terms of, that are online and things that really would provide pathways into sort of the industry. I myself, I've worked quite a few years now, but it was only sort of about last summer that I found out there's such a thing as silent props. There's actually sort of when they're they're filming something like in a scene in a bar, they don't want ice chinking in glasses, so they actually make sort of rubber ice, sort of like that. If you see somebody playing pool in a scene, there'll often be squash balls which have been painted to look like pool balls so they can be played, not going to make the noise. So even sort of like brown paper bags, you see those in films, they're actually made out of plastic, but they've been made to look like paper bags so that they don't sort of crinkle when they're sort of thing. But then that means then we've got the Foley artist whose jobs it is to come in and actually sort of add those sounds back in afterwards. So people who have to then go and make these sounds up, who have to, work on these sorts of coming up sometimes with the sounds, fight scenes. If you see a fight scene in a film, obviously they're not actually hitting each other. There'll be stop pulling the punches, stopping short. But then you've got a Foley artist in a studio with a cooked chicken and punching that and recording the sounds, which are then sort of added back on. Broken bones with sticks of celery. When you see these and things, and then all of a sudden how the visceral nature of a fight is actually, a fight scene in a film is actually a dance, because you're just repeating a set of choreographed moves which you're repeating. Whereas, sort of actually the visceral nature of it comes from adding the sound effect on the things. You find out about those sorts of aspects. The thing you can then do is to get an idea of kind of then sort of the credits. I think there's historically, it's one of the good things I guess that's come from sort of the MCU films, showing sort of the mid-credits and credit sequences. It encourages people to watch the credits. I mean, I've talked about 500 people working on sort of BBC ITV high-end dramas. But I think something like The Avengers, you're talking about 20,000 people involved in the process of that. and even if you count all the names, you're not going to get that number, but a lot of particularly effects shots are delegated out. I think the hammer, whenever you see the Thor's hammer there's a particular company in Italy that animates every frame with the Thor's hammer in it. There's another company that whenever you see inside Iron Man or any of the Iron Patriots helmets, when you see the display on somebody's face, there's a separate company that does that and only gets recorded on the credits is the name of the company and the head of the company. It might be like 100 people working for them to do them. What that allows you to do is actually sort of then the digital research or polite stalking, depends which way you want to look at it. It is the fact that the sort of people within the industry are often, there's a lot of goodwill in the industry for people to support the next generation. What tends to be the thing that's most limited is time, but there are some people out there that if you sort of go on to sort of productions and just see the people sort of like maybe not the head of department but a few rungs down, you know, it's amazing the stuff you can go and sort of see what they, you know, I know people have conversations with people on Twitter, on Instagram or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a frustratingly terribly built app, but it is more work focused, and I see people are a bit more responsive to questions and things that when people are asking things from there. So it's worth sort of being aware of that. There's also the fact that sort of like there's again so certain people will reveal snippets of information in interviews that they might have done. I know of a chief executive of a company who revealed that, you know, in a Radio Times interview that she particularly likes sort of handwritten letters. And I then sort of know subsequently somebody who took that advice, and we have a long waiting list, a queue of people who wanted to do work shadowing. She very quickly jumped to the top based on that. Other times, script writers, Jim locked down a script writer. She gave his email out, an office email out, do it on a podcast. And, you know, I was just trying to, people asking me questions, and I'd be saying, go and listen to this podcast. Have you listened to that one? You know, I'm not going to do the work for you, but I was just pointing them in that direction in terms of what these things are coming up. There's snippets of information and guidance that can go through. I mentioned about pathways, and really sort of like it's this way. I think it's one of the hardest aspects of my job is that, you know, I'm going to talking to people, you know, students, school pupils, and you're talking about the sort of the idea of it'd be wonderful if it was like, so if somebody asked me to be a doctor, well, if they want to be a doctor, then I can say these are the qualifications you need at school, these are the places where you can go and study at university. You'll go and work in sort of like as a junior doctor, and then you can go on to specialise or go on to be a GP. When it comes to this industry, for example, if you take the example of a director, pathways are quite varied, and it's essentially you just have to sort of like no two people are the same. It's a question of finding your own pathway. So I do sort of a workshop where I go through the top 10 directors off the IMDb, based on the top 10 films on IMDb, and get people to find their sort of very first IMDb credit. So Frank Darabont, he was a set dresser, was his first credit. Before he got his scripts thing, he then sort of wrote scripts before thing like that. Francis Ford Coppola, he has made films throughout his career, but a lot of the time he was actually, you know, he's got as pretty much as many producing credits. He's setting things up as much as actually the directing. You've got people like Peter Jackson and Christopher Nolan who have made films and then progressively got bigger and bigger. But to do that, they had to do, you look at their credits and the fact that, you know, Christopher Nolan has a soundtrack credit on his first film. He was doing a lot more. So it's a question of, if you want to go down that path, you have to be sort of like, well, you look at them and say, well, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to be capable of doing all these multiple different jobs. Some people come to us and they kind of like, I only want to work in high-end TV, or I only want to work in film. At which point you're going, well, you know, Steven Spielberg didn't start straight away in film. He started in TV. There's a certain episode of Columbo that sort of I was sort of on that they show on one of the sort of like those 5 USA channels or something like that, and sort of like watching that one weekend, and sort of Steven Spielberg's name comes up at the sort of thing. Apparently even the sort of, you know, you've got people like David Fincher who started off in music videos. You know, Ridley Scott started off in adverts. You know, people start off in different mediums before they get through. Like Frank Darabont, James Cameron was a set painter, worked in visual effects before sort of like directing. You know, and then you got Sergio Leone, like Clint Eastwood, was an actor before becoming a director. So if somebody comes up to me and asks, so if they want to be a director, I'm kind of just like saying, well, there's so many different pathways that you can take. And it's about sort of like, so, and that's sort of, it is about plowing your own sort of thing. It's worth looking into sort of your favorite, going back to what I said before, finding your favorite directors or people that inspire you, see what they did, you know, and you might not go the exact same way, but there's sort of things you can pick up and sort of guidance going through. Of course, when it comes to sort of actually then sort of getting your first job within the industry, there's the whole thing about you know, the application process. You know, there's some things that sort of like are consistent through all sort of different sort of parts of the working world, but I think there's some aspects that it's worth noting within the sort of the TV and film industry. There's a few sort of niches and sort of little quirks that tends to have come through. So we have some general tips, sort of like, is the fact that even the largest, even Disney do have a HR department, but the people ultimately who are going to be sort of going to be deciding on jobs are actually sort of the heads of department, or people within, senior people within a different department. They're not going to be, it's not going to be like a HR sort of thing. You are going to get a very much more of a human element in terms of the sort of the shortlisting process. The example, I think I mentioned this, is that there's a health and safety sort of officer, the head of the health and safety department, that is used by sort of Bad Wolf. Basically, everybody believes that their department is the most important one. I passed on 80 sort of applications to him last year. He came back half an hour later and went, "Here's the 3 shortlist candidates." And I went, "Right, you were very quick there. How, you know, sort of out of interest, what was your process?" He said, "I just read the personal statements. 3 of them mentioned health and safety in their personal statements. If they don't want to work in health and safety, if they're not going to mention health and safety, they don't want to work in health and safety." And that was his shortlisting criteria. It's that kind of sort of aspect you have to sort of think about when it comes to sort of, it's that casual flattery that comes through. You know, make it clear you understand what you're applying for. We get a lot of people applying for things and they're applying for the career that they want rather than necessarily the job. You know, we have jobs in the script department and we get extensive amount of people talking about how the things that they have written, but then you have jobs like assistant script editor, which is actually what you're actually going to be doing is assisting the script editor, a lot more office work. Now, it's a good pathway into the script department, and it's a good way of actually sort of working your way up to be, you know, to more senior jobs in the script department, even writing scripts. But telling us about sort of like your script writing skills is not what they need. They need somebody, they're more important if you tell them, yeah, I'm great at using spreadsheets, I'm sort of like good at organizing meetings. Those are the kind of criteria we get. Even to the point that sort of like, we help process a script supervisor role. Does anybody know what a script supervisor does? Yeah? Yeah, I mean, sort of like basically, sort of it's continuity is one of the main tasks of that. We had 320 people apply for that one recently, and for production, we just went through the people who mentioned either continuity or displayed some understanding of the role, and 80% of people didn't. They're all just talking about script writing. So that was kind of, production were very pleased that we did that, because then they were sort of just immediately working off that sort of far smaller sort of cohort rather than the full sort of 320 applications. So it's good to make sure you're clear that sort of that you have understood what the job it is that you're applying for. It's subjectivity is quite easy to sort of to put into something. It's not necessarily about sort of it's good to avoid subjectivity. So if you're going to put something down, just provide a context for it, and sort of I'll come more and explain more on that. And it's be able to highlight your highlights, and again, that's something that I'll mention again. But overall, CVs, it's the 8-second rule. Have somebody look over it and see what they remember after 8 seconds. Keep it to the bare bones. Previously, I did work for a few years in teaching, and it was kind of like the standard thing was like 2 sides of A4. I quite sort of like very quickly sort of I've realised that sort of like if you can't fit it onto one side of A4, then you've gone on too long about something. There's no need for anybody's CV to be more than one side of A4. Okay. I've had people show me sort of studies the fact if you use an unusual font, it forces people to work harder to read it and therefore pay more attention. My advice is, whenever I give advice on careers, it's the fact that I always treat this the fact that sort of like I'm not saying that it won't work, but I know majority of people will just look at that and go, dismiss it straight off the bat. They're not going to spend time. If they've got a number of applications, the process tends to be more. They're looking for reasons to sort of to remove you from the sort of to get the numbers down. So use a standard font and size. PDF any document. I had a fantastic. Somebody was an art department job. They sent stuff, and it was like really well presented CV, and had some really nicely sort of set out and had examples of their work down the left-hand side of the page. It was in Word. I was reading on Word desktop, and I just happened to call my colleague and said, "Oh, this is a really good CV. Oh, send it over." She instinctively just opened it up, and it opened by default on Word Online, and the images were overlapping the text. The format had gone to pot. PDF it, you'll know what people are going to get. I've had people submit things in Pages. I have a Mac. Not everybody does. And it's easy to translate. There's the easy ways of converting it from Pages into Word or into the PDF. But again, if it's something that's going to take a couple of minutes, you're giving somebody an opportunity to think, actually, I'm not going to bother. As I said, one side of A4, and save it with a specific job and title. It's about the first things that you see. It's the first things you see, and I'll mention later on, is that you're going to email. Then you're going to see the file name. And if you're applying for a job and it says, let's say it's a camera trainee role, and the CV says acting CV 2021, immediately gives the impression, right, so you haven't updated this in 2 years, and you've titled it of something completely different set, that immediately thinking, right, this person hasn't sort of done anything to personalize it to this job. I mentioned about standing out. It's important to remember that people read from left to right, top to bottom, or in our culture sort of thing, obviously. It's good to bear that in mind. To highlight stuff by either underlining it bold or isolate it to highlight text. I did the 8-second rule test for somebody, and they had content-wise, it wasn't so much the words were fine, but they had some good content, and then they had a space, and they had highly competent at using Word, then a space, then a little bit of text, and that couldn't help but stand out to me, and I was going, that stands out. You don't want me to be taking away that as a thing that you're competent at Word. The fact that you've typed this CV up suggests your IT skills are up to sort of a level whereby I would have taken that as read. So the idea of kind of like that you make sure you know what you're prioritizing. If something's isolated, something's in bold, then be aware of the fact that is something that people are going to naturally come across and stand out. So we have a basic order that we suggest things go in on the left-hand side, but we say don't necessarily follow that template. That's just in terms of order. There's plenty of templates. That's come off from Word that you can sort of put it in. It's about putting the order in terms of sort of actually sort of recognizing how things are coming through. So CVs overall, personal details. A lot of people, we do get sort of an alarming number of people forget to put their name on a CV because they think that they sent it with an email, but it gets filtered off and stored separately. You don't need to put your full address nowadays because nobody's going to be sending a letter, but it's worth putting your general location or where you've got bases. That can be a useful bit of information. Also, in that is that it's not something I'm sort of, I wish this wasn't the case, but I'm keen that the industry should be sort of looking to be more sustainable. But if you can drive, put that in your personal details. It frustrates me because I go and ask, before we're posting jobs on our website, I ask productions, what are the key things you are looking for? Do you want them to be able to drive as part of this job? And they'll say, no, it's just fine. And then people then apply, and then sort of like you see people being shortlisted and you're going, why have you chosen those people? And they said, they said they could drive, they're actually quite handy. Yeah, okay, but you haven't, there's potentially people who could drive but didn't put it down because it wasn't listed as a job description. So if you can drive, put that down on your CV. The personal statement, that only needs to be a couple of lines, but I think that's where whenever somebody says that your CV needs to be adapted for every job, realistically, you can do all the heavy lifting in the personal statement. Personal statement just needs to be, I'm applying for this job of da-da-da-da, and then just one or two sentences explaining why you'd be suitable. And you change that for every job, and it immediately stands out and makes it look like it's been tailored, not just generic. Then put your work experience, and when I say work experience, don't try and second guess what they think is going to be relevant. So much of the time, we've had people who have, the difference between people being shortlisted is the people who've got coffee shop experience, hospitality. Because again, applying for the job, not the career, they're looking for people who can sort of got people skills, being able to sort of like, that can be beneficial. I was part of a shortlisting thing for a job in locations. I saw somebody sort of pick up a CV, went shortlisted. Immediately I was like, what was it that you were able to make that decision within sort of like literally barely read it. He said, in work experience, I just saw the fact during lockdown, first COVID lockdown, they did 3 weeks of nights at Asda stock taking. If they've done nights, they'll turn up. It's worth them being shortlisted. So, sort of have all your sort of work experience. Don't think that's nothing to do with TV and film. It's about sort of the broader sort of experience. Any awards, your skills, education. It is important, but it's about sort of it's about the context and saying sort of within that. I have had somebody who listed every grade exam that they've done on the violin listed, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. And I'm thinking, just put grade 5 and you assume that you've got that ability, that you don't need to add everything else on afterwards. And again, there's places whereby there's things. A lot of times, as I say, in terms of the work experience, and I said that everybody should be able to get everything in one page. It's that the people sort of sometimes, because they've worked as a runner, and a runner is a really diverse range of tasks. And I've seen people sort of take up half the page describing all the different things they did. They had to do loads of unusual different range of tasks. But essentially, if you've done a runner job, people know the fact you will have done a whole range of different things. So you can all you need to have is like the title, dates, and then sort of what production that was on in that base. And the same thing if you've worked as a sort of a barista in Starbucks, there's lots of different aspects to that job. I'm not trying to, it's not trying to sort of downplay any of these jobs and sort of like belittle them, but people will know that they sort of like that is, that they are aware of the fact that, there'll be lots of things. It might be sort of like maintenance of the coffee machine, cleaning, organising, sort of, there's lots of management jobs in it. And then you got the kind of, the hobbies and interests bit, but generally make it relevant to the job. Not necessarily knowing about your sort of, I enjoy socialising in my spare time. It doesn't need to be that sort of level. Cover letter. First and foremost is if they've asked for a cover letter, submit a cover letter. Because again, to be honest, probably 80% of their decision process will be done on the CV, and often people don't end up reading the cover letter. But if you've got 200, 100 plus applications then, and you've asked for a cover letter and you haven't submitted one, that doesn't bode well for attention to detail. And so therefore, again, it is sort of something they'll quickly highlight and recognise. Be job specific in the guidelines. Again, Bad Wolf have had a huge amount of Doctor Who fans writing near essays about their love for the TV programme. That's not applying for the job. That's not. They don't. It's useful that obviously they want people who are passionate about the sort of industry and ideally about the programme they're going to be involved with. But that's not what they're going to be sort of employing you on. Avoid using I had to, use I did, and sort of like, I have devised and implemented positive actions. Again, if you're saying I'm a wonderful people person, just saying that on its own is not that productive. It's about sort of actually saying I'm a wonderful people person through my experience of working in a coffee shop. Again, clear and concise, spell check. I'm dyslexic. I couldn't cope out without a spell checker. You acknowledge the sort of like the stuff they've done, as I mentioned, and again, PDF it. A couple of bonus little bits and pieces. Emails, either be your name at domain.com. So mine is Rhys at screenlineswales.com, or your name and skills or department. So mine would be, in that instance, Rhys Training. Don't use anything that you think is funny. We've had people sort of submit applications. One guy, it was something like lazygeorge@gmail.com. Immediately sort of like, we weren't going to sort of, that I didn't think. The worst one was that somebody's actually, his email was I hate the Welsh. gmail.com. But in both cases, it transpired that those were both ironic nicknames or jokes that they'd done at university. The lazy guy, who's actually sort of, he eventually sort of got a position. It turns out it was kind of like, he was incredibly sort of proactive and it was an ironic kind of nickname that he'd had. He was hyperactive at university. You had the sort of thing, but that's one of the first things that people are going to see. They're going to be making judgments based on that. avoid, as I say, don't give them the opportunity to make a judgment on your email. Don't give them an opportunity to make a judgment on the file name of your document. Make sure they're actually getting the point of reading it. Social media, I'm fortunate. There were no people going around with cameras. There were no camera phones when I was at university. God help me. But what I do suggest is if you have a professional account and you put that on your CV, you bypass that. They're not going to go looking for a second one. So if you do have a profile, do that and use it to share your highlights. When Disney came down, we got a girl a job in the special effects makeup department purely on the basis of her Instagram account, because Disney really liked she'd set it up. She'd gone from she hadn't any relevant qualifications, but she started off an Instagram account following a specific YouTube tutorial where she'd designed a scar on her arm. Then over the course of 18 months, she'd gone to the point whereby for Halloween, she was making one friend look like a zombie, another one looked like skin had been peeled off half of her face. And every step along the way, she had done it purely for buying stuff off the high street and following YouTube tutorials. So Disney thought, well, if she's done that in her own time, own initiative, we're going to take her on as a potential role. It's about, if you're doing something graphic, art-based, then having some sort of, having a digital portfolio. Websites are great. But I do recommend obviously things like Instagram is such a useful tool in terms of being able to collate things, and it's easier to update. You can literally do something and update it very quickly with your mobile phone. Websites do get a bit problematic, and it is noticeable then when something hasn't been updated. Make your best things easy to find. So if you're an aspiring filmmaker and you do have a brilliant film that you've done, it's a 3-minute, 4-minute film, don't share to the start of the film. Share a YouTube link to your best 10 seconds. You can share on YouTube and Vimeo. You can share to a time code in the thing, so you're highlighting. Give them the best 10 seconds that they can watch. And then they'll actually, if they really like it, same thing if you've got an Instagram account, share a link to your best, if it's a best bit of artwork, and then if they like it, they'll then explore the rest of the account and then follow it through. Have a short link and have it stuck onto your CV. In the same way as when we were doing a tour at Central Square, the BBC studios in Central Square, and some of the school kids were being told, right, there's lots of big buttons, don't press them. You could be taking a radio show off air. And the same thing is that if you put something on your CV prominently that is blue, underlined, it's like having a red button on a table. Okay, you just can't help but just to click on it. So you're inviting somebody to go through. So that's a bit of a whistle stop talk through quite a generic set of things in terms of what we provide at Screenlance Wales. We give guidance in terms of that, in terms of CVs. We can give people specific information and obviously I can answer any questions now in terms of specific departments. But it's also when people are applying for things, feel free to send us CVs before you submit them, and we can give advice, feedback. It's never about there's nothing, and there's nothing I can say to to say to people that there's a guarantee, but I generally, the advice I always talk about the roulette wheel. There's nothing I can say guarantee, but I know some things could potentially take you off the thing entirely. I was actually speaking to somebody when I was one of the times here before, and he was saying about some company in Manchester whereby somebody had applied for a job, didn't get a reply, and then 2 weeks later had sent them a picture of a toy hedgehog with a gun to its head and saying, reply to me or the hedgehog gets it. Now, in that instance, the company saw the funny side and actually sort of got in touch. My advice is never do that, because everybody I know would not take sort of very well to that. I know when sort of we give feedback and somebody comes back with a particularly sort of aggressive sort of response to not getting a job, and you're thinking, okay, they're not going in the nice pile. You know, it's the question of sort of, we can't recommend them as being sort of, if anything were to come up again. So yeah, it is about sort of, so hopefully advice when we're working sort of, as I say, across, my particular sort of remit is to sort of try and get things out of Southeast Wales. I'm from Aberystwyth originally. I'd like to be in a position that people who went to my school in Aberystwyth are in a position where they have a better idea of career guidance than I did. Yeah. So any questions?